It is so nice to see everybody, and it's so nice to see you, our interviewee, Austin Green. Good morning, Austin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. It's so lovely to have you. My friends and I have been studying the Uinta Mountains and completing our research quest investigation of that area. And we are going to be having an interview for the next 30 minutes. And so my friends who are joining us, if you have any questions for myself or Austin, please click the Ask a Question button or leave us a comment on Facebook. What kind of questions you might ask? Well, Austin Green, PhD candidate, has studied all sorts of mammals around the world, right? Because you've told us some really cool stories. And your work is currently focused here in the Wasatch Front in Utah. So let's go ahead and start off. Can you tell us a little bit about your research here in the Wasatch Front?
Yeah, sure. So my project's called Wasatch Wildlife Watch. And what it is basically just a camera trap project combined with a community science project.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we do is set up a bunch of motion activated camera traps where anything that walks by with any type of heat signature, we'll trigger these cameras. They'll give us a bunch of wildlife photos that we then sort through. And all of those photos then give us a bunch of data, answer a ton of questions. But what's really great about this project is that we have about 250 cameras out, and that's something that could be only done with a massive amount of work and a massive amount of people. And it's just something that typical research teams don't really have the capacity to do. And so what we did was open it up to the entire community. And so we have hundreds of volunteers at this point working on this project, setting up these camera traps, and taking ownership over each station. So every site that's set up is set up by a different team of community scientists, and they're the ones that set the camera up. They gather the photos, they look through the photos, and they enter them into the database. So they're really participating in every aspect of the project.
That's super cool. I always think that we should act locally, think globally when it comes to animals and conservation and all sorts of cool stuff like that. So I've also done camera traps. Do you have a favorite picture? Because I think there's some, I don't know if everybody knows what a camera trap snap actually ends up looking like.
Yeah, I definitely do. And I've got a few actually. Let me see if I can share my screen. Let's see if this works.
My camera trap caught a picture of a bear pooping right next to my camera trap. It's my favorite picture.
Oh,
Or
nice.
one of my favorites. You've got some really beautiful ones.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely get some funny ones too. But yeah, here's a few of my favorites. So I'm really partial to large carnivores. Can you guys see this screen, by the way?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. And that's always been what I've worked on since I started grad school. And so the largest carnivore in our ecosystem in the Wasatch is mountain lion. So these are some of my favorite photos of mountain lion. I really love this one. I think it's just kind of a cool action shot where it's just going across the screen like that. This is another really good one that we got really a few years ago in the winter, where it's just kind of posing right out there for us. That's one of my favorites.
Very majestic.
Yeah, it's super awesome. And then we get some action shots too. So here's a coyote jumping up. It was pretty awesome to see. We have usually what these cameras will do is take bursts of photos. And so it's anywhere from 3 to 5. And so we kind of have the entire sequence of this coyote jumping up and down. It's pretty cool. But then sorry.
I was going to say this information down at the bottom. Can you share with our viewers what some of that information or how that's important and helpful?
Yeah. So that information is actually vitally important. I'm glad you brought that up. And so at each one of these camera traps, and it depends on the model. In this photo, they're up here at the top, but they have a date and a timestamp. And we can use that information to look at a bunch of different things. So activity, so when are these animals active versus when other animals are active? What type of behavior do they have? So are they active more nocturnally? Are they active more diurnally? And we also have a timestamp. And then most importantly, we have a GPS location with each one of these cameras as well. So the photo itself gives us the date, the time, the animal, and the site. so where it's actually located. And that's really vital information for studying, especially like what we're studying is large mammals. These animals are incredibly difficult to study in just about any other capacity. They're super rare. They're really wary of humans. It's really tough to just go out and find a gray wolf like this photo out, walking on a road if you're just going and surveying yourself. But when you set up cameras, it's a really non-invasive way to get a lot of information about these animals that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. And this is one of my really like all-time favorite photos of a gray wolf. This is actually not in Utah. This is in Turkey. So you had mentioned that I had done a lot of work in northeastern Turkey, and we set up camera traps there as well. And so this is one of my favorite photos of a gray wolf. And then the like main animal that we study in Turkey are Eurasian brown bears. And so we get a lot of cool photos of Eurasian brown bear as well. And these brown bears are really unique in that their main food source is actually a municipal garbage dump. So there's not a lot of prey species in this ecosystem. It's actually been highly degraded by like livestock overgrazing. And so a lot of these animals just feed on the garbage dump. And that's actually kind of led to them being a little chubbier than normal. And so you'll see a lot of these photos. I have a couple more brown bear photos. This is just another cub, but some of these brown bears, especially this one, they're a little bit on the bigger side. And so really we get a lot of cool photos from them. But, basically, if you're at all interested in seeing some of the photos for yourself, specifically the ones that we get from Wasatch Wildlife Watch, you can actually do that. Let me pull up our website. So if you just search Wasatch Wildlife Watch, it'll pull up this website right here. And this gives you all the information from our project. So it gives you the total number of sites that we've set up, the total number of animals that we've seen, the different number of species, how many of each one of those species that we've seen. And then you can also click on this view all favorite photos here. And that takes you to all of the best photos from the project. And so this is just a ton and ton of pages of all these different photos that we've been gathering over the past few years. And if you want to just search a specific species, so this is just mule deer, you can go in here and just search a specific species, and you can check out all of the different photos that we're getting from this thing.
That's very cool. I have a quick question. James
Okay.
from Provo is asking, how closely are Eurasian brown bears to our brown bears?
They are incredibly closely related, actually. So, and they share an evolutionary past. So when all of the continents were together, they basically were the same species, and it was through this like spreading out of those continents that you then got the branching off, because they were then separated from each other population wise, and so they were given some time to differentiate. But they do share a very close evolutionary relationship. That's a great question.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. I have a question from a pattern I have noticed in some of your pictures is that in Turkey, you showed us a few pictures of bears and the wolves, and they were on like a road. And then the cougar that you showed us, there was one where it was also kind of on the road, and that they were eating like from garbage in Turkey and stuff like that. So my question is, clearly in Turkey, there's some places where humans and animals maybe bump up against one another pretty frequently. Does that happen so much here on the Wasatch Front in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely happens. And that's actually why we're studying the Wasatch in general. The Wasatch is an incredible place. And when you look at the numbers, it's actually the most highly trafficked national forest in the entire country. So we get about 9 million visitors every single year. That's equal to all 5 of our national parks combined. So we get a ton of people that visit this area. And that gives us an opportunity to study exactly what you're saying, how wildlife and humans interact. And it might not be on the same level as it is in Turkey, because that area is so degraded that these carnivores are forced to interact directly with humans or with their livestock. That's not the case here in the Wasatch, but we get a ton of indirect effects. So we get housing development, road development, hiking traffic. We get, dog traffic, stuff like that. And so that's some of the things that we're really looking into with this current project. And that actually kind of leads me to this. So that's why I still have this screen pulled up. If you want more information on the project itself, Wasatch Wildlife Watch, you can just search the Wild Utah Project website for this, and it's right here up here at the top. And this is basically the main website for the project. This gives you all of the partners on the project, gives you a bunch of information. You can even access our training videos and project updates from 2020. You can also register to become a volunteer, whether that's through looking through photos or setting up a camera yourself if you sign up right there. And that'll take you to this page and you'll go through the sign up process. But then there's also the option to basically just look through photos and to sign up to look through photos. And so all of that can be done right there. And so if you really do want more information on this, if you're more local and you're looking for a project to get involved in, this is definitely one way to go.
Yeah, there was I want to give a shout out to a friend who had sent in a question a few days ago. Ada in Los Angeles was wondering how to get involved with some of the citizen science, community science projects from the Natural History Museum of Utah, and using Wasatch Wildlife Watch. That's a lot to say.
It is.
A little bit of a tongue twister. That'd be a great way you could get involved.
Mhm.
I have another question for you. I was wondering if you could tell us, do you have any like particularly fun stories from the field of like setting up a camera trap? And oh, how is a camera trap set up?
Oh, that's a really good question. And so with our camera traps, they're really easy to use. You can actually just go out and buy one yourself and set them up in your backyard. But basically, you can buy them off Amazon. You can buy off of any hunting and game store out there. And what you do is they come with a bunch of settings. And so you just have to supply the memory card and the batteries, and then you get to customize the settings however you want. And then when you go out in the field, you simply just find a relatively straight tree to set them up on. And that's basically, you just run from it from there. You turn them on and then they do the rest of the work for you. And so that was the first part of your question. What was the second part again? Sorry.
If you have any fun stories, when I was setting
Yeah.
up a camera trap, I saw a bear very close to me and finished setting up my trap and skedaddled out of there pretty quickly. Do you have any
Yeah.
stories like that?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't have a ton of like actual encounters with like a bear or anything like that while I'm out setting up cameras. But one of the cool things that we get is we get a look at the photos of these cameras after they're active. And I do a lot of my camera setup in Red Butte Canyon, and it's a really highly protected area, and it's actually a really important area for cougar. And so it's really interesting to see the photos. So you'll see the photos of me setting up the camera, and then I'll walk down the trail to get to my next camera, and like 5 minutes later you'll see a cougar walking down the road. And so it is always really interesting to like see those cameras like after the fact. I would rather know that it's after the fact than they're actually there stalking me, but that's happened multiple times where you'll have animals just kind of following you down the trail, a little bit of a time lag behind you.
That's pretty crazy. We have a few questions coming in. Laura asks, oh, if you have any brand recommendations for camera traps.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there are a few that are kind of like research grade camera traps. The ones that are highly used right now because they're both price efficient and really good quality are the Bushnell cameras. And so there's Bushnell Aggressor, there's Bushnell E3, and then there's Bushnell Core cameras. All three of them kind of do the exact same thing, they just have different names. But yeah, they're really great cameras. And that's the ones that we use for our project.
Cool. Let's see. Drew asks, oh, I mean, relevant to your story of having them follow you down the trail. Are you ever afraid being near these mammals?
No, not really. That's super awesome question. It's also one that I get a lot, and it kind of depends. So actually, if you're out hiking alone, I highly recommend that you don't actually do that. About 99% of all hiking accidents happen to lone hikers. And so the best way to protect yourself is to simply go out with someone else. But more often than not, the animals that you encounter are way more afraid of you than you are of them. You've heard this a bunch of times before, but it is true. And so typically if you're giving them their distance, then really you can just enjoy them. And so we come across a lot of moose and elk and mule deer when we're setting up cameras. And instead of really being afraid or anything like that, they will give you a sign of whether or not they're comfortable or not with you being there. And if they're not, then you can just simply back away.
Yeah.
And so they've learned how to coexist with us, and so coexisting with them should be just kind of the other side of that coin.
Teamwork, right? Both sides
Yeah,
of it.
exactly. It's a little give and take relationship.
Yeah. Addie from Arkansas asks, do you ever work with forest rangers for your research?
That's awesome. Yeah, I do. So we specifically work with the Forest Service in getting jurisdiction to all of these lands. And currently, we're not in like a direct partnership where I'm having Forest Service rangers accompany me to go out and to set up these cameras. But they are the ones that basically set up the permissions and all of the paperwork on the back end to allow us to actually go up and set up these cameras in their lands and in their wilderness areas. And so there is a lot of talk with them moving forward to try and get a more formal partnership so that we can actively be working with them and they can incorporate this into their normal management scheme. But right now, it's more just a jurisdictional kind of back end type of partnership.
Well, that question and like some of the other things we've been talking about today, especially the evaluating your photos, leads me to a big question, which is I know studies can go on for quite some time, but are there any results or patterns you've seen that you would like to share with us? We've been looking at correlation and causation and weak evidence and strong evidence all throughout our time with Research Quest. So do you have anything you'd like to share with us about your
Yeah. And so to quickly touch on that, that's awesome that you guys bring that up. A lot of the studies, if you're doing any type of like field work studies, it's really difficult to manipulate any aspect of it. And so for the most part, ecologists are not really able to get at this causation question. A lot of what we do is correlation, which kind of leads me back to why it was so important that we had so many sites. That's 250 camera sites, because when you're looking at correlation, one way to make it so that your results are more powerful or more telling is to have a large sample size. And so, yeah, that's basically what we're doing. And I do have a few results. I'm going to share my screen again.
Okay, go for it.
Let's see if this works.
Results are always really exciting.
Yeah, and I was super excited to like make these up. So can you guys see this map right here?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So this is a map specifically of cougar activity in the Wasatch. And so what you'll see is a bunch of these little blue dots. Each one of these blue dots was an actual camera site that was set up during 2018. And so this was our first year of setting up cameras. We thought it was going to be a pilot year. We had no idea what was going to happen. We ended up getting about 95% of the cameras set up and gathered data. So we ended up using this information to answer some of these questions. And so what you see is a habitat map here. And so if you look on the legend to the right, you'll see that there's two main color coding systems. And this light color to dark color one, that's habitat quality. That's based on where we got photos of mountain lion. We can then use that information to tell us what habitat is the most important here in the Wasatch for mountain lion. And so each one of these blue dots, if it's surrounded by a yellow circle, means that a mountain lion was actually captured in that camera. And so you can then use that clustering to analyze what was the most important habitat. And so you'll see this right here is actually Red Butte Canyon Research Natural Area. And so that would make sense that that's the most important habitat for mountain lion. And you can see that there's really these nice little pockets of good habitat for mountain lion here in the area. But you can also see that there's this nice red line that seems to cut them almost directly in half. And that's actually I-80. So that's the interstate here in Utah. And so that's one thing we're now looking at is how is that affecting habitat fragmentation? But another thing is just using these information from these cameras, we can get a good idea of the core habitat for each species. And that's what's located in this really light gray color. So that means that if you want the current levels of mountain lion to persist, this is the amount of habitat that should be available to them. And so that was a cool little thing that we've gotten from 2018. Another one, this is a little more intensive, but what you're looking at here is each species right here on the bottom is represented by one of these dots. And what you're seeing right here is just basically, this is a line showing whether or not they are affected by housing or not. And so if they fall on 0, then they're not affected. If they fall below 0, then they actually prefer no housing. And if they fall above 0, they prefer areas with housing. And so then we looked at all of these species, and you can see that the vast majority of them prefer no housing. And the ones that are orange are like the really statistically significant ones, the ones that really do not like housing. And that would make sense. You have your elk, your puma, your turkey, your coyote, and then you've got your fox that do prefer housing, which would also make sense. They're found in urban areas. And then
Mhm.
everything else just kind of falls in between. And so that was another one that we were able to do. And then, good for me at least, we did the same thing with just hiking traffic. So this is the exact same thing. We just looked at hiking traffic and how that affects these different animals. And so what that is actual human traffic measured at each camera site that was specifically on a hiking trail.
Okay.
Uh, and what was great about this is, at least great for me because I'm a big hiker, is that there was no effect for just about every single species, which kind of corroborates a lot of evidence from other projects in other parts of the United States. And so that was nice to see, though, because I was a little worried about this. I was like, oh no, am I going to have to stop the amount of hiking that I'm doing? But because hiking is such a low and a non-invasive thing, especially if it's done correctly and you're sticking to the trails, it really doesn't have any of effect on these animals.
Cool. Well, we've had some questions come in while you were sharing your findings with us
Oh,
about
cool.
your findings.
Nice.
Linda from Salt Lake City asks, is there a way to bridge the gap between those two hotspots for the of the mountain lions?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question. We're actively working on that right now. And so this all that data was gathered before a major wildlife overpass was completed along I-80 up in Parley's Canyon. And so now what we're doing is we're doing that same analysis for the the past years, but we're incorporating this information now from this wildlife overpass. So this an overpass is basically just this bridge that was built over the interstate where animals use to cross back and forth. And so now we're actively monitoring that overpass and we're trying to see the direction of traffic. Are they coming from the north to the south more often or the south to the north? And that can give us an idea of how that distribution is working. So that's one of the ways you can do that. And to bridge that gap is to build these overpasses. And so we're hoping that in future years, when we run the same analysis, as this overpass is used more and more and more, those little fragments or those little spots where it's not connected are going to slowly fill in. And we're going to start seeing more of a general, like just a general color coding across the entire map instead of little patches.
Cool. When you say that you're monitoring the overpasses, are you monitoring those with camera traps?
Yep. Yep. So we
Cool.
just have a couple camera traps on each side of the overpass. And yeah, we're just monitoring what is going through. And what's great about having them on both sides is once again, you have that date and time stamp. And so if you get a photo of a mule deer at, a certain time there, and then you get a same mule deer just a little bit afterwards, you know that that mule deer has crossed the overpass. And so that's how we're basically studying that traffic. And we're trying to see, because if you remember that map, the areas the most important to mountain lion were Red Butte Canyon. They were on the north side. And so what we're hoping to see as we go forward is that more traffic is coming from the north to the south than the other way around, because that would show us that that source population is feeding in to the areas in the south.
Cool. I have another question. You said that like if you saw an elk like go and come back on the camera. Important question. How do you tell one elk from another? Do they have like tags or such, or collars or something?
Yeah, so with males, you can tell from their antler pattern. And so typically a lot of this analysis is only done with males because you can tell from their antler pattern. But with the females, it has to be, so what you do is you set a designated amount of time. And so if you're saying that it's, going to take the average animal, let's say 2 minutes to cross this overpass, then any instance of an elk on the north side that's followed by an instance of an elk on the south side within that certain time frame counts as a crossing. And if it's over that time frame, then it doesn't count as a crossing unless we can verify the individual, if that makes any sense. And so
It
that's
does.
how we go about doing it. And then with mountain lion, it's actually a little easier because they typically have some type of scarring pattern. And males and females usually have a really different skull morphology. And so the males, just like with your male cats and your female house cats, male cats have these giant faces compared to the females. And so we can use that information to basically tell if it's the same individual or not.
Cool. Let's see. They're coming in. More questions. Amy from Ogden asks, why do turkeys not prefer places with houses while geese or quail seem totally fine with it?
Another really good question. And really honestly, so I'm a mammologist, so I'm going to try and answer this question as best as I can. But turkey just consistently across the board when we were running this analysis were really strange. And I think that has to do with a bunch of different things. And so when you look at like an urban area, you get your geese, you get your ducks, you get all of that good stuff. And they do really well in these areas. And then turkey, especially in Utah, are almost predominantly found in the more rural areas or the more kind of Forest Service type areas. And honestly, that probably wasn't the case before humans got here. Turkey were probably found in the Salt Lake Valley just as often as any other species was until humans got here. But what has most likely occurred is just the adaptability of your goose and your ducks and all of those different species to human traffic was probably just at the point where they were behaviorally plastic enough that they could adapt to it. Whereas turkeys, they were either overhunted in this area and basically pushed into our more protected areas. That's my best guess. Honestly, I don't know the exact answer to that though.
That's very fair. I do think I am I would call myself at least an ornithologist, and I would say that probably like the habitat of turkeys, like there's probably a mix between wanting to be up there now and the habitat that's available to them. Yeah. Jason from Ogden asks, ooh, this is an excellent question. We've been monitoring in our research quest. We've been looking at like change over time and how that happens and how we can measure that and notice that. Jason from Ogden asks, have you seen any changes in the areas you're monitoring these past 10 years?
So unfortunately, we've only been monitoring for 3 years.
Okay.
And so we're just barely starting to have enough data to monitor trends in these different species. And luckily, for the most part, at least those 3-year trends look very promising for most of our species. Just about everything is staying pretty even kill. And so that's actually probably the most important thing to do with any type of monitoring project or scientific project is to keep it going long term, because the longer a project runs, the more valuable that data becomes, because just like Jason said, you can start monitoring those trends. And so that's why we're really excited that we were able to set up cameras this year. And as long as this project continues, that information will start becoming more and more available to us. And once we have that 10-year data set or that 15-year data set, we can really start getting an awesome idea of exactly how these populations are affected. And as the landscape continues to change, we're going to be monitoring the same sites every single year, regardless of whether or not that landscape has changed at that site. And so that added component is going to allow us to say, well, this site used to be national forest land, now it's a housing development. What has occurred specifically at this site within those last 10 years? And so that's some of the information we're really excited to get, but we just basically have to keep it going in order to find that.
Cool. Thank you. Well, we are just about out of time. To find Austin's project, you can search Wasatch Wildlife Watch, and all the information you need to get involved and help out and look at some cool pictures of animals will be there. We are just out of time, but if you're looking for more options for community science, we're going to be talking with my friend Ellen Erickson on Friday, and we'll be talking all about even more community science stuff. But apart from that, Austin, it was so lovely hearing from you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to see you guys again.
Excellent. Well, it was lovely having you. Friends, please, please, please join us tomorrow at 9:30 Mountain Daylight Time, where we do more of our Uinta forest investigation with my friend Andy. And then tomorrow we're going to have another interview with Colby and Rob, who are the video, who worked on filming and editing for the Uinta Research Quest to begin with. So if you have any kind of like videography questions, tomorrow's the day. Other than that, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you all have an excellent rest of your day. Bye, everybody.